Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when one of the biggest names in Hollywood sits across from Joy Behar on The View and is asked whether the industry has abandoned traditional American values? What unfolds is nothing short of explosive. Jennifer Lopez, known not only for her music and acting, but for being unapologetically glamorous and outspoken, walked onto the stage ready to celebrate her new film project. But the conversation quickly shifted. Joy Behar didn't waste time pressing Lopez on whether Hollywood has become out of touch with the values everyday Americans hold dear. What started as a tense back and forth spiraled into a fiery cultural debate about family, morality, faith, and celebrity privilege. Jennifer refused to sit quietly, defending herself and her industry with sharp words and emotional conviction, while Joy doubled down, arguing that Hollywood's influence has eroded what once bound families and communities together. The studio audience gasped, cheered, and clapped through every exchange. And by the end, the clash left viewers wondering, is Hollywood still a reflection of America, or has it become a world of its own? The stage of The View had seen its share of heated arguments, but there was something about that day that carried a heavier charge. The question on the table, has Hollywood lost touch with traditional American values, was already primed for fireworks. Jennifer Lopez, glamorous yet unshaken, sat across from Joy Behar, who leaned forward with her trademark grin that often signaled trouble was about to follow. The audience buzzed with curiosity. On one side, Lopez represented not just Hollywood glitz, but someone who had managed to balance career, motherhood, and her Bronx roots. On the other, Joy Behar, sharp-tongued, unapologetic, and willing to say what many might not. The sparks began almost as soon as the cameras rolled. "Jennifer," Joy started, her tone deceptively casual, "you've been in this business for decades. People out there say Hollywood doesn't reflect real America anymore. It's too elitist, too wrapped up in its own bubble. Do you think Hollywood still represents the values this country was built on?" Lopez smiled, but it was measured, controlled. "I think Hollywood, like the rest of America, is evolving. We tell stories. Sometimes they're messy, sometimes they're bold. But values? Family, love, hard work, resilience, those things haven't gone anywhere. I grew up in a very traditional home. Puerto Rican parents, Catholic upbringing, Sunday dinners. Those values are in me, and I don't think I lost them just because I live in L.A." A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. Lopez had spoken with sincerity, grounding her response in personal truth. But Joy wasn't done. She leaned back, her hands folding in front of her as she tilted her head slightly with her trademark grin that often signaled trouble was about to follow. "That sounds nice, Jen. Really. But let's be honest. Hollywood glorifies lifestyles most Americans can't relate to. The private jets, the multi-million-dollar weddings, the divorces every other year. People at home look at that and say, this doesn't look like my neighborhood, my church, my family dinner. So when Hollywood tries to tell the rest of America how to live, it feels a little out of touch, don't you think?" The audience shifted, half gasping, half clapping. A split was forming in real time. Jennifer adjusted her posture, leaning in. Her voice carried both warmth and steel. "Joy, I get what you're saying.
But here's the thing. You can't take the worst examples and make that the whole story. There are so many people in this business who care deeply about their families, their communities, about giving back. You don't see every quiet moment, every sacrifice. You see the headlines, the scandals. That's not the whole of Hollywood. The tension in the studio thickened. Co-host Sarah Haynes tried to jump in, her voice calm. Maybe there's a middle ground here. Hollywood has influence, and sometimes it does push boundaries that feel disconnected from tradition, but it also tells stories that inspire. Joy cut her off, eyes still locked on Lopez. Inspire? Sure, if you're inspired by superheroes saving the world every summer. But where are the movies about small-town families, or the dignity of everyday life? Hollywood used to celebrate those stories. Frank Capra did. Norman Rockwell painted them. Now it's all flash and shock value. Do you really think Hollywood hasn't drifted away from the roots of this country? Jennifer didn't flinch. She took a brief pause, almost as if she was counting her breaths, and then spoke with quiet conviction. Joy, I came from a working-class family in the Bronx. Nothing was handed to me. I know what it's like to ride the subway every day, to share a room with your sisters, to watch your parents work hard jobs just to make ends meet. I don't need anyone to tell me what real life is. And when I make a movie or even a song, I try to bring that realness into it. Just because I have success now doesn't mean I forgot where I came from. The audience applauded loudly, some even rising from their seats and cheering. But Joy, unfazed, leaned closer, her voice sharper now. But Jennifer, you've been married how many times now? 4? That doesn't exactly scream traditional values, does it? A collective gasp shot through the audience. Whoopi Goldberg, sitting at the far end of the table, raised her eyebrows and muttered, "Oh boy, here we go," drawing a few nervous laughs. Jennifer's face hardened for the first time. Yes, I've been married more than once. I've also learned, grown, and refused to settle for less than the love and respect I deserve. Is that not a value worth teaching? That you don't give up on yourself? That you keep believing in love no matter what? That sounds pretty American to me. The crowd erupted, clapping and cheering, with some shouting, "Yes, and tell her, J-Lo." Still, Joy wouldn't let it go. But Jennifer, the average family in Ohio or Nebraska doesn't have the luxury to keep chasing love after multi-million-dollar breakups. They stay, they work it out, they sacrifice. That's what tradition is. Hollywood sells a fantasy that leaves the rest of the country feeling small. Jennifer didn't hesitate. No, Joy, what leaves people feeling small is being told their struggles aren't valid, that their dreams are unrealistic. I've met fans who told me my music helped them leave a toxic relationship, or my movies made them believe they could start over. Hollywood at its best isn't about showing you what you already live. It's about showing you what's possible. The applause was deafening this time. Some in the crowd were practically on their feet, clapping and cheering for Lopez. Joy's smirk wavered just for a moment. She adjusted her glasses, shifting back in her chair, though her eyes stayed locked on Lopez, as if silently promising this was far from over. And just like that, the sparks on stage weren't just flickering anymore. They were fire, lighting up the room, daring everyone watching, both in the studio and at home, to take a side.
The studio air grew heavier after Jennifer Lopez's defiant defense of her choices. The audience was buzzing, split between those clapping for her resilience and others nodding along with Joy's biting skepticism. The polite sparring had shifted into something far more combustible. Joy leaned in, her tone sharp, each word clipped. "Jennifer,
You talk about possibility and chasing dreams, that's fine. But people back home are asking why Hollywood feels the need to lecture them about what values they should hold. Why does an industry full of people who live in gated mansions think they have the moral authority to tell Main Street America how to live? The audience reacted with gasps and scattered applause. Joy's words cut deep, and for a moment it felt like she had thrown a punch no one saw coming. Jennifer didn't miss a beat. She straightened in her chair, her eyes steady. Joy, Hollywood doesn't exist in a vacuum. We're not here just to entertain. We're here to hold a mirror up to society, to challenge, to question. That's part of art. Yes, I have a platform, and I'm going to use it. If I didn't, I'd be wasting it. And let's not act like the rest of America doesn't also love Hollywood. People show up for the premieres, they binge the shows, they quote the lines. Clearly something resonates. Her words drew thunderous applause, with fans in the audience shouting, "That's right," and "Preach!" Joy wasn't swayed. She leaned closer, lowering her voice in that way she did when she wanted her point to sting. Resonate or distract? Look, Jennifer, Americans love entertainment, sure, but they also resent being told their way of life is outdated or backward or not progressive enough. Hollywood stopped respecting tradition a long time ago. Instead, it sells ideals that most families can't recognize, let alone afford to imitate. The crowd murmured, some clapping for joy now, others booing. A visible divide rippled through the studio. Jennifer's tone sharpened, the warmth giving way to steel. Joy, I think you're confusing evolving values with a lack of respect. Traditions change. Families today don't look the same as they did 50 years ago. And that's not a bad thing. Love is love. Family is family. Hollywood is just reflecting that reality. To say we're out of touch because we celebrate diversity or push boundaries, that's not fair. The audience roared, the sound echoing across the studio like thunder. A few audience members stood to clap, while others crossed their arms firmly on Joy's side. Joy, undeterred, smirked. You talk about diversity, Jennifer, but what about accountability? Hollywood pats itself on the back for being inclusive, but it's also the same industry that covers up scandals, that puts profit before principle. Traditional values aren't just about who you love. They're about honesty, loyalty, humility. Do you really think Hollywood embodies those things? The studio fell into a sharp silence. The accusation was heavy, and for a brief moment, even Lopez's confident exterior seemed tested. But she inhaled, visibly grounding herself, then replied with fire. Joy, no industry is perfect. Hollywood has had ugly moments, sure. But you know what else? It has also given countless people a voice who never had one before. It's put stories of women, immigrants, minorities, and working-class people on the big screen. You call that a lack of values? I call that progress. Her words rang with conviction, and the crowd erupted again, cheers so loud they nearly drowned out Joy's attempt to interject. Progress? Joy finally shouted over the noise, her face animated. Progress doesn't mean abandoning roots. This country was built on faith, family, and responsibility. Hollywood pretends those things don't matter anymore. Instead, it glamorizes excess, divorce, and self-indulgence. If that's progress, then maybe we've lost the plot. That line landed with force. The crowd split audibly, half cheering Joy, half booing. A wave of tension rolled through the studio. Jennifer leaned forward now, her eyes blazing. Faith, family, responsibility, Joy, those things do matter to me. I'm raising kids. I've worked my whole life to provide for them and to teach them the values my parents taught me: hard work, respect, love for family. I didn't forget where I came from just because I made it in Hollywood. And I won't sit here and let you say that because I'm in Hollywood, I don't value those things. That's not just insulting to me, it's insulting to everyone in this business who's trying to do good." The crowd erupted in applause, this time louder and longer than before. Jennifer's words carried a personal weight that resonated beyond the stage. But Joy, never one to back down, threw one last jab for this round. "Jennifer, you keep saying you represent real values, but the reality is Hollywood sells dreams while most Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And those dreams, those big glossy fantasies, make real life feel smaller, harder. People feel left behind, not lifted up. That's the problem." Jennifer's eyes narrowed, her voice calm but razor sharp. "Or maybe, Joy, people feel inspired to dream bigger, to not settle, to see that their story matters too. Because if a girl from the Bronx can make it in Hollywood, then maybe someone watching from a small town can believe in themselves too. That's not abandoning tradition, that's expanding it." The applause was thunderous. Some people in the crowd were on their feet, others were booing, but the energy was alive, still raw. Sarah Haynes, sensing the rising storm, tried once more to mediate. "Ladies, I think what we're seeing here is exactly why this question matters so much. People feel a deep connection to tradition, but they also crave representation of how families and values look today. Maybe the tension is the point." Whoopi Goldberg, who had been mostly quiet, finally sighed and added with a half-smile, "Well, I don't know about y'all, but I think we just proved Hollywood hasn't lost touch, doesn't it?" The audience laughed nervously, some clapping, but the energy was still charged, still raw. Jennifer and Joy locked eyes once more, neither willing to concede ground. The clash wasn't cooling off, it was only getting hotter.
The conversation, already tense, shifted into a deeper, more personal register. The earlier laughter and scattered applause faded into silence as Jennifer Lopez leaned forward, her voice quieter now, but laced with conviction. "You know, Joy, when you say Hollywood doesn't care about family or tradition, it cuts deeper than you realize. Because for me, family is everything. My mother worked nights as a kindergarten teacher's assistant, and my father was an insurance clerk. We didn't grow up with much, but my parents instilled values that still shape who I am: discipline, respect, and the importance of staying connected to our roots. I carried that with me to every audition, every rejection, every stage I stepped on. Don't tell me I lost those values just because I've made a career in Hollywood." The studio fell quiet. Jennifer's tone had stripped away the gloss of celebrity and revealed raw sincerity. A few audience members nodded, visibly moved. Joy, for once, hesitated before responding. Her eyes narrowed, but her words softened, only slightly. "Jennifer, I don't doubt that your family gave you values, but the industry you're defending doesn't look like your parents' kitchen table. It looks like red carpets in award shows. It looks like scandals brushed under the rug and celebrities preaching to regular folks about things they can't possibly understand." The remark landed hard. Some audience members clapped, others groaned. The divide widened. Jennifer sat up straighter again, her voice growing sharper. "Jennifer, I'm not claiming Hollywood is perfect. It isn't. But let's not pretend America outside Hollywood is perfect either. Every community has flaws. Every industry struggles with accountability. But Hollywood has also given millions of people stories that reflect their lives, stories that heal, stories that inspire. That's not out of touch. That's necessary." She paused, her voice trembling for just a moment as she added, "And I'll tell you something else. I've seen my kids light up when they watch films that show families like ours, families with different backgrounds, families that don't fit some 1950s picture-perfect mold. That's value.
That's connection. That's what I fight for." The applause this time was thunderous, with people cheering, some even shouting her name. The emotion in her voice broke through the noise of the debate. But Joy wasn't ready to yield. She leaned in, sharper now. "Jennifer, what about the kids who don't see their families reflected at all? What about the ones watching celebrities go through 5 divorces and thinking that's normal? What about the constant glamorization of wealth and fame while regular families are struggling to buy groceries? How is that tradition? How is that respect?" Her voice cracked with passion, her words carrying more bite than humor now. The audience gasped, some applauding, some booing. The stage felt like a courtroom, and Joy's challenge had landed like a gavel. Jennifer didn't flinch. She clasped her hands together tightly, her knuckles whitening, then released them as she replied, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "Joy, I've been divorced. I've made mistakes, and I've done it all in front of the world. But you know what? I've also picked myself up every time and kept moving forward. Isn't that what American values are supposed to be about? Resilience, second chances, growth? Why is it that when Hollywood shows imperfection, people call it corrupt, but when everyday families face the same struggles, it's called life? We're not different. We're just under a brighter light." The audience studio erupted in cheers, though the sound was mixed with murmurs from those still siding with Joy. The rawness in her voice seemed to catch even the co-hosts off guard. Ana Navarro chimed in, her voice gentle. "I think what Jennifer's saying is important. Families aren't perfect. Never have been. My parents fought like crazy, but they stayed together, and it taught me something about commitment. But I don't think seeing Hollywood show messy, imperfect lives is necessarily bad. It can actually be comforting." Whoopi nodded slowly, adding, "Tradition isn't about pretending life is perfect. It's about how you hold on through the tough stuff." But Joy wasn't softened. She raised her voice over the agreement building against her. "Hold on? Yes, but not glamorize the dysfunction. Hollywood normalizes things that used to be rare: broken homes, kids being raised by nannies instead of parents, people treating marriage like a disposable contract. That's the heart of my argument. We've lost the backbone." The words hit like a hammer, silencing the audience momentarily before a ripple of boos and applause swept across the studio. Jennifer took a breath, her hands pressing against her chest now, as though holding herself steady. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. "My kids are not raised by nannies. I tuck them in. I show up at their school plays. I'm at the dinner table with them when I'm not working. I fight for balance every day because that's what my parents did for me. And I want them to know where they came from. That's not losing touch. That's fighting harder than ever to keep tradition alive in a world that makes it harder to do so." For a moment, the applause was deafening. Audience members shouted, "Yes, and that's real." Jennifer's emotion had electrified the stage. But Joy, visibly taken aback, leaned back in her chair, her lips pressed tightly together. But she recovered quickly, her voice quieter now, but edged with finality. "Maybe you live that way, Jennifer, but Hollywood as a whole, it doesn't, and that's the difference." The tension was palpable. Jennifer's jaw tightened, but instead of lashing out, she sat back, her eyes glistening, her voice measured. "Joy, maybe the problem isn't that Hollywood has lost touch. Maybe the problem is we're too quick to judge it without seeing the people behind the lights. Real people, with real families, real values, and real struggles. Just like everyone else." The silence that followed was deafening. The audience divide had never been clearer, half clapping furiously, half sitting with crossed arms. The emotional line had been drawn, and it was no longer just about Hollywood or tradition. It was about what America wanted to believe about itself. The flashpoint had landed. There was no going back.
The tension on set had reached a boiling point. The audience, once responsive with applause and laughter, now sat in an uneasy mix of anticipation and dread. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't a simple segment anymore. It was a cultural battle happening live, and no one knew which way it would go. Joy leaned forward, her finger tapping the table, her voice sharp as glass. "Jennifer, with all due respect, you keep trying to make this about you personally. But this isn't about Jennifer Lopez. This is about Hollywood as a system. It sells an image, it profits off excess, and it pushes values that don't line up with what everyday Americans believe in. Families sitting at home don't want their kids idolizing lifestyles that are unattainable, unstable, and frankly, destructive." The audience gasped, some applauding, others shouting no, and "That's unfair." The division was stark. Jennifer's face tightened. She shook her head, clearly fighting to control her response. Then she leaned forward, her voice low but intense. "You're not listening, Joy. You keep trying to make this about you personally. But this isn't about Jennifer Lopez. This is about Hollywood as a system. It sells an image, it profits off excess, and it pushes values that don't line up with what everyday Americans believe in. Families sitting at home don't want their kids idolizing lifestyles that are unattainable, unstable, and frankly, destructive." The audience gasped, some applauding, others shouting no, and "That's unfair." The division was stark. Joy's face tightened. She shook her head, clearly fighting to control her response. Then she leaned forward, her voice low but intense. "You're not listening, Joy. You keep trying to make this about you personally. But this isn't about Jennifer Lopez. This is about Hollywood as a system. It sells an image, it profits off excess, and it pushes values that don't line up with what everyday Americans believe in. Families sitting at home don't want their kids idolizing lifestyles that are unattainable, unstable, and frankly, destructive." Joy's voice rose, bristling with fire. "Destructive. What's dangerous is pretending that what comes out of Hollywood doesn't shape culture. Kids learn from what they see on those screens, and what they see is broken marriages, casual hookups, greed, excess, selfishness paraded as normal. If that's not eroding traditional values, then what is? Don't lecture me on danger when the industry you're defending has made billions promoting dysfunction." The audience erupted, half cheering her, half booing her. Whoopi Goldberg raised her hand, her deep voice cutting in. Okay, everybody calm down." But the energy was slipping past her control. Jennifer's chair scraped as she sat forward sharply, her hands flat on the table, her voice now trembling with anger. "Joy, do you even hear yourself? You're talking like Hollywood is some monolithic villain sitting in a tower plotting the downfall of American families. It's not that simple. You know what else is dangerous? Shaming families who don't fit some outdated mold. Single moms, blended families, kids raised by grandparents. Are they less American? Less traditional? Because those are the people you erase when you act like only one type of family is valid." Her words landed with force, pulling loud cheers and applause from the audience. Some even stood up, clapping furiously. Joy slammed her palm against the table. "Don't twist this, Jennifer. Nobody's erasing anybody. What I'm saying is that for generations, there was a set of shared values: commitment, sacrifice, respect for tradition that held families together. And Hollywood, with all its so-called progress, has made a mockery of those values." The clash was no longer a debate. It was an explosion. Both women leaned toward each other, their voices raised, their words overlapping. Jennifer's voice cracked with frustration as she shot back. "Progress isn't mockery. Progress is recognizing that love and loyalty come in many forms. You want to talk about values? How about compassion?
How about resilience? How about giving people the dignity to define their own families without being told they're less than because they don't fit some nostalgic fantasy? The crowd erupted in cheers, the energy in the room now uncontrollable. People shouted yes and preach, while others booed loudly in Joy's direction. The set had become a battleground. Anna Navarro tried to interject, her voice almost pleading. Ladies, ladies, we're going in circles here. But neither of them stopped. Joy's voice was practically shouting now. And what happens when every tradition is thrown out the window? When nothing is sacred anymore? You tell me, Jennifer, what happens to a country that forgets where it came from? Jennifer's eyes glistened, her voice cutting through the chaos with trembling intensity. Maybe it finally learns to love everybody for who they are, instead of forcing them into boxes they never fit into. Maybe that's the America we're supposed to become. The audience exploded. Applause, whistles, and shouts filled the air. Some were on their feet again. Others folded their arms, glaring at the stage. The divide had become so sharp it felt like the studio itself was split down the middle. Whoopi raised her voice again, firmer this time. Okay, we've got to move on. But her words were drowned out by the crowd's noise. Jennifer sat back suddenly, her chest heaving, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up her water glass. Joy crossed her arms, shaking her head with a hard, dismissive laugh. The tension between them now was visible in every movement. Then Joy delivered one final, cutting remark. You can dress dysfunction up in sequins all you want, Jennifer, but that doesn't make it tradition, and it never will. The words hit like a gut punch. The audience gasped audibly, some even shouting, "Whoa!" Jennifer's face hardened. For a moment, it seemed like she might respond with equal venom, but instead, she shook her head, her voice quiet but piercing. And you can hide behind nostalgia, Joy, but that doesn't make it truth. Not anymore. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the audience, so vocal moments ago, seemed stunned into stillness. Whoopi leaned in, her voice low and urgent. All right, I think we need to take a break. The cameras cut to commercial as Jennifer and Joy sat rigid, the air between them crackling with unresolved fury. The audience murmured like a storm rolling in, buzzing with disbelief at what they'd just witnessed. The breaking point had been reached.
When the cameras came back from commercial, the tension was still thick. The audience buzzed with low chatter, some still shaking their heads, others whispering about what they'd just seen. Joy sat with her arms crossed, her lips pursed, while Jennifer leaned back in her chair, calmer but visibly drained. Whoopi broke the silence with her trademarked steady tone. All right, folks, I think we all need to take a breath here. Conversations like this, they get heated because they matter. People care. And clearly, today shows just how deeply people care about family, tradition, and the future of this country. The audience applauded lightly, some relieved to have the volume turned down. Jennifer finally spoke, her voice quieter but cutting through the noise. Look, I didn't come here to fight. I came here to say that values, real values, don't belong to one generation or one industry. They live in the way we love our families, how we show up for each other, how we survive hard times. That's not out of touch. That's human. There was a long pause, then a swell of applause. A few audience members even stood up again, clapping warmly. Joy uncrossed her arms, her face softening only slightly. She sighed. Jennifer, I'll give you this. You're passionate, and you've got your convictions. We just disagree on whether Hollywood helps or hurts, but at least you made your case. The exchange wasn't reconciliation, but it was enough to release some of the tension. Ana Navarro leaned toward the camera. And maybe that's the takeaway here. Tradition means different things to different people.
Some folks want to protect what they grew up with, others want to evolve. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. The audience clapped again, this time more evenly, the atmosphere settling. But as the credits loomed, social media was already on fire. Clips of Jennifer's trembling but fiery defense of her values spread instantly on Twitter and TikTok, racking up thousands of shares. Hashtags like JLo versus Joy and American Values began trending within minutes. Fans rallied behind Jennifer, praising her for standing her ground. Critics, meanwhile, echoed Joy's concerns, calling Hollywood out of touch. It was the kind of cultural collision daytime TV thrives on. No neat answers, but plenty of sparks. As the outro music swelled, Whoopi offered the final line. At the end of the day, tradition means what you make of it. And judging by today's conversation, people are making a lot of it. Thank you to Jennifer Lopez for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow. The audience applauded once more, but the energy was unmistakable. This was an episode people wouldn't forget.